Recess. Senators, the legislature is back in session. And prior to the recess this afternoon, we left off with an amendment proffered by Senator St. Nicholas, which is on page 2, line 15, where it says no later than 3 months, to then make it no later than 12 months. So on that amendment, is there anyone who would like to speak on the amendment of the 12 months? Senator Morrison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I thank you for the recess, and we were able to come up with a compromise. And I believe that we agreed to, instead of 12 months, or no later than 12 months, on page 2, line 15, that we would go with 6 months. So I'm making an amendment to the amendment.
Okay. On the amendment to the amendment then, which is from, again on page 2, line 15, instead of the 12, again, it's now amended to 6. On the amendment to the amendment, no objections? So ordered. So it is 6 months. Thank you. On the amendment, you're right, for 6 months, you're right, because that has been amended now. So anybody now would like to speak that it's on 6 months? No objections to that? So ordered. Thank you very much, Senators. Very good amendment. All right. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the main motion? Anyone else? Okay, Senator then Morrison, I understand that you also then, you can either close, and at this time you can also make further amendments.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on page 3, I'd like to proffer another amendment to delete on page 3 after the parentheses GVB, comma, delete from all the way down to line 22 after task force, period.
Okay. On the amendment, page 3, line 16 after GVB, where it says all mayors, down to line 22, where it says task force. No objections? So ordered. And by the way, it's still 11 members anyway, so they have an odd number. Senator, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, before I proceed to close, I like to add some co-sponsors to Bill 264. And this Chairman Rodriguez and Senator Torres, Speaker, yourself, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment to add sponsors, Rodriguez, Torres, and Wanpat, no objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to speak on Bill 2.4, and I just want to clarify with folks that may be kind of intimidated by the word development or hearing development in this whole process. And if you look at subsection 68606, Master Plan Guidelines, development really doesn't mean a large-scale project in everybody's backyard or for that matter. So I just want to point out some of the areas that are focused on within the guidelines, and it speaks to within the plan as far as infrastructure, including electricity, water, sewage, roads, communication, tourism, population enhancement, of course, commercial development, industry, zoning, archaeological preservation, ecological protection, agriculture. So the list goes on, Madam Speaker, and I want to make it clear that when we're looking at this task force to develop the Southern Development Master Plan, these are the guidelines that are very important, and we are not really wanting to alarm folks out there. That when I can understand hearing what or what they're seeing out there with what's taking place at Pago Bay or the proposed large-scale project in Agate, I can understand when they hear development or what we're attempting to do here, they may be thinking that we're proposing such as those types of projects. So I just wanted to put on the record, Madam Speaker, that these guidelines are very specific to enhancing our southern areas in a much larger scale than what they're seeing out there. So I thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity. And I thank my colleagues for their input.
On the motion then to send 264 to third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Okay, Senators, we're going to go right back again to the beginning because the committee report should be, you should have a copy of the substituted version on Bill number 160-33. Senator McCready, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to make a motion that Bill 160-33 as substituted by the committee go down to the third reading file and discuss.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 160 was a much bigger and broader bill than what it is today. But as one of the good members of this, former members of this body said, sometimes you take what you can get. And that's exactly what we did. We took the suggestions of the public hearing and we added them to the bill. And basically what this is, Madam Speaker, is this is an opportunity for Guam to develop a fisheries conservation, or I should say a Fisheries Conservation Act, that's what the name of the bill is, and to establish something that we've never had before, which is a commission to oversee the natural resources on Guam that we all use every single day of our lives, which is the fish. The fishing, the selling of the fish, the consumption of the fish, the boaters, the tourists, all these things that we I would say take for granted are being depleted every single day, and we really don't have the resources or capability to police this. And it's been going on for many years, to the point where I think that we may leave a next generation with sand at the bottom of the ocean. And so when I speak of this, I speak from a certain amount of experience. I've been a fisherman on Guam for about a decade now, and I see and I speak to the fishermen. I see what's going on in the ocean. I take my family out there. I sometimes come in and sell the fish when you catch it, and sometimes you give it away, and sometimes you keep it. But the consistent aspect of this entire process is every time you go out, every weekend you go out, it gets harder and harder to catch fish because there's not much fish left. And my concern is, and the people that have these concerns on these issues, is that in 5, 10, 15, 20 years definitely from now, we'll be ordering our fish from a fisheries farm off the coast of Australia. Just ask Japan, just ask California. They do it now. There's no sustainability in their fishing. They have to order fish, yellowfin tuna, that are grown off Australia because there's nothing left. So this is an opportunity for us to say, hey, let's start policing some of these industries so we have it for our next generation. And this generation, I'm afraid that this generation may not have any more fish. And so, has spoken to some of the members of this organization. And you know what, Madam Speaker, I understand you're not going to please everybody. This is not something that everyone's going to love. But I think it's an absolute necessity because we have this amazing natural resource that generates over 1 million tourists a year. And we allow this resource with open arms to be depleted without policing it. And I think that should come to an end. And if you look at the bill in a little more detail, we also find a solution to put boat docks on the eastern side of the island. Something that is extremely important for the safety of not just boaters, but swimmers and marine users throughout the island. You just ask any firefighter how long it takes them, or how long it takes a boat to get from Agana Boat Basin or the Agate Marina, go all the way around Ritudian Point, and then you pass Patty Point, and then if you're lucky enough, because Patty Point is the point that is the roughest on the island, if you're lucky enough to get past Patty Point at certain months of the year, at which we put our firefighters' lives in danger, you may be able to get to a distressed swimmer or a distressed boater. It's happened many times. We've lost many people out there, and we still don't have a boat dock. We still don't have enough conservation officers to police people fishing in preserves. Now, I've talked to a lot of these professionals in fisheries. They are not against fishing in the preserves, but policing the fishing in the preserves. Manny Duane has been the president of the co-op for 20, 25 years. He's not against fishing in the preserves. He's against policing it. He's not against policing it. He's for policing it. Maybe some certain months of the year. So that's where we're at here. We are at basically, we also, Madam Speaker, had a $3 per tourist fee that we attached to this bill. And then I got criticized, and everybody came at me and said, in the industry, the tourist industry, you can't do this. This is wrong. And I met with all of them, and I've heard negative feedback from all of that. At some point in our existence, I believe that this beautiful island surrounded by beautiful water, which not many other countries have, is going to have to put a price tag on that. We cannot no longer just let people use our resources and say it's free. Do what you want. Come in, take what you need, take what you want, take whatever you want, and don't worry about it. And that's where this bill would start having a little more teeth, and we could start preserving what we so importantly need, which is preservation of our fish. So hopefully the body agrees with me, and I'd like to hear what they have to say. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Mr. Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Actually, I just would ask if the sponsor would yield to a question. I'm
Okay. Yes.
in
Ask your
63908
question
on page
first.
7.
Okay. What
There's
page?
it's page 7.
Page 7.
This mention of compensation for the board members. Is that going to be from the fees that they generate, or there is no funding source unless you're going to be using the fees collected?
Madam Speaker, when I originally...
I'm sorry, I didn't ask you. Do you
Sure,
yield?
I will. I mean, that's something I can answer. If it was
All right.
too hard, I wouldn't be able to answer it,
Okay.
but that was a softball. When constructing this bill, I didn't want to over-mandate the board before it even started. And I also didn't want this bill to be an appropriations bill before we even got the core of what I thought should be the importance of this bill, which was to establish the council. And the Vice Speaker's right. There's no funding source. This is baby steps. We're going to have to generate some funding sources. And we're going to have to, maybe we might have to lean on the executive branch to have that startup fund. But I really didn't want to end it before it started. I guess his question was the $50 fee for the council members. So I would hope that we would be able to have that as a living and breathing work in progress type of thing before we even got to, because we've never had a fisherman's council yet. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I'm trying to make it a path as clear as possible. And when the time comes to figure out how the fees will fund it, or if we need to get the money from the administration, I'm sure they would have no problems, start giving us the startup money.
Well, he still has the floor. So, Mr. Vice Speaker, I know he wasn't able to answer your
Thank you very much.
question,
The only
but-
problem that I have, Madam Speaker, is that in the bill it says they shall be compensated $50 per meeting, $100. With all due respect, one of our favorite projects between myself and the sponsor is the parole board. The parole board doesn't get compensation. The Civil Service Commission that meets 3 times a week for 3 or 4 hours a night doesn't get compensation yet. And they've been in existence since we started the merit system 70 years ago. So I'm just saying, I have real concerns about the inclusion of this one provision in here at this time because there is no funding source for it.
Okay, we're going to
Madam Speaker, I'll remove it.
Okay, so
Thank you.
we'll take a brief
Sure.
recess. Senator
Yes.
McCready, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the concerns of the Vice Speaker, and because of his knowledge and his tenure in this legislature, I'll go ahead and remove that provision. And
So then on page 7, the motion is from lines 8 to 10 to delete. Any objection? Page 7.
the
lines-
compensation, 63,908.
Section 63908 compensation, then the 2 other lines. So it's lines 8, 9, and 10. Any objection? No objection, so ordered. Thank you, Senator. You still have the floor. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Now, it's open to others. Anyone like to speak on the main motion? Anybody else? Senator, okay, I saw, wait, 1 minute, Senator San Nicolas, and I saw Torres, and Espadon, and then Frank Blas. No, not you, cancel you? Okay, so I've got San Nicolas, Torres, and Espadon. Okay, Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized. On the main motion.
I have a question for the audience. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm just going through the bill and I'm trying to get a visual of the how the process would work. And so, from what I'm understanding, this council will be formed, and one of their responsibilities will be to set up permitting requirements and to create the regulations governing those permits and those requirements. The first question I wanted to pose to the author, though, is I don't see in the bill who the permitting authority is. I see that the council can create permit requirements, like, for example, if you're going to operate a jet ski business in Agana Bay, then these are the requirements to get a permit to be able to operate that jet ski business, but who is the permitting authority? Where does the business go to get to the permit to be able to conduct the activity?
Okay. Senator, do you yield to the question?
Yeah. Yes, Madam Speaker. So the Department of Agriculture and the council that we're trying to develop would then enter into a MOU of understanding, a memorandum of understanding, that would allow them to work cohesively together to achieve this. And so that's where, in the committee report, when we spoke to the Department of Agriculture's director, that was their direction, that we would set up a MOU between the two. Because right now what's happening is the Department of Agriculture does not have the resources or manpower or the money to establish something like this and to sustain it. So they would have to come up with an MOU with the Department of Agriculture.
On page.
And that was discussed during the committee report. During the public hearing.
But on page 7, if you read lines 25 and 26, you've got the AG also.
And again, Madam Speaker, with those two particular lines, it's to establish a schedule of permits working with those two agencies, but again, it doesn't clearly, there's no clear party responsible in the bill for issuing the permits. And the reason why I bring that up is because it takes me to my next question, which is the adjudication of those permits. Who's the one that has the authority to revoke them? If someone wants to contest its revocation, what's the appeal process? We don't have any of that here in the bill. And so if we're going to be creating a process by which enterprises, whether you're going to go out there and fish with your, with your fishing boat or whatever, if you need to go out and get a permit, we need to make it very clear where they go and get their permit from. If they are denied a permit or if their permit gets revoked, what's their appeal process? How do they go through a due process to be able to either fight to keep their permit or to be authorized for one? We don't have any of that here in the bill. There isn't even any language in the bill to mandate the MOU between this council and the Department of Agriculture. So I like the direction of where the bill's going, but I think we're still missing some administrative steps that need to be codified in order for us to have a smooth process by which this whole intent is able to be carried out. The other concern I had of the bill, Madam Speaker,
Can we
was...
deal with that question then first?
Okay, sure, Madam
Okay.
Speaker. So the question I guess I'll yield would be, how would you adjudicate a permit
Sure.
that's being revoked or a permit that's being denied?
Or who's going to do it? So, Senator, do you yield to the question as to who
I'm sorry. That was a long question.
No, but he shortened
No
it by
offense,
saying
but that was-
who really will be the one to promulgate, or
Okay, so-
adjudicate, these rules and regs.
Okay, so 30 seconds, real quick. I just want to make it clear.
30 seconds, 30 seconds. Senator, you have the answer?
And if you go to E, to review and provide the advice of the impact of the laws affecting the sustainable use of the marine freshwater resources, to develop programs to enhance and promote sustainability of Guam's marine and freshwater sources, to provide guidance and assistance to the Department of Agriculture in the expenditure of the funds. So all this is going to come from the Department of Agriculture, with a MOU from the Department of Agriculture saying that there are now partners to work together in this conservation act. And so this isn't something that the legislature or the commission or the agriculture is going to do something by themselves. This is something that they're going to have to work together. And the questions are good, and I appreciate them, but this is also something that we've never had before. So I would like to see this enacted because, one, we really don't know how depleting that our resources in the water is. Nobody knows except the fishermen and the people that are involved in this. Not even agriculture, and that's no disrespect. They don't know because they don't have the resources to find out. And so this would be a tool for them to actually find out. And we've never had a conservation. We've never had a council before. And so when we talk about the simplicity of just starting a council, and you take a guy like Manny Duenas, who's been the president for 20-something years, this is something that he really, truly believes in. And this is something that he needs. This legislature appropriated, I think, $2.5 million or $2 million to build a new co-op. And then he went and got a loan, I think, for $3 million to secure more funding to turn dirt on that thing. Well, what good is a co-op doing when there's no fish? And so I don't know if that answers his question, but hopefully it does.
Okay, Senator, you still have the floor, and I hope he was able to answer your question.
The answer was almost as long as the question. Actually, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the attempt by the author to clarify, but I still have the same concerns, only because as he stated in his response, that there's a lot of uncertainty still in the rolling out of this whole process, and for us to authorize under law the adoption of rules and regulations to require permits, but to also leave open how those permits are to be adjudicated, who the issuing authority is going to be for them. Those are still very, those are outstanding. I mean, what if someone were to issue a permit, that basically, or would require a permit that would jack up the fees for the jet ski operation there at Alupang Beach to all of a sudden cost way more than they're able to afford, and that permit became a requirement. How would the owner of the establishment be able to go and appeal that new permit requirement? Or on the flip side, what if this council, because this council, and I'll get into the composition in a minute, but this council only consists of 7 members. And so basically we're going to create a 7-member body that's going to be able to establish any kind of rule and regulation pursuant to the AAA process that's going to be governing the entire marine industry here on the island pretty much. Commercial, fishing, everything else. And I appreciate the intent in order for us to be able to have a conservation element here, rather than just, willy-nilly everybody being able to go out and do what they want. But if we're going to be creating a process for this under law, it needs to have a clear step-by-step way of going about not only getting the initial permit, but if you're denied or if your permit's revoked, how do you go about adjudicating it from there? We do have a lot of enterprises that do all kinds of different things in the water, and so that's why I kind of wanted to bring up the makeup of the council. Because on page 4, the qualifications of the council, there's only going to be, based on what I'm reading here, 7 voting members. 3 of the members are appointed from the community at large, and they're appointed by the governor. 1 is a member in good standing of the Marianas Underwater Fishing Federation. 1 is a member of the Organization of Saltwater Anglers. 1 is a member of the Guam Fishermen's Co-op, and 1 is a faculty member of the University of Guam. So we have 3 appointed by the governor. This is a 7-member council, mind you, so you only need 4 for a majority, 3 of which are appointed by the governor, so only 1 of the remaining 4 to be able to, have a majority, make a decision there. But of the remaining 4, 3 of those remaining 4 are all in the fishing industry. The Fishing Federation, the Saltwater Anglers, the Fishermen's Co-op Association. So the council looks very fishing-oriented, but the entire powers of this council have everything to do with all of the marine activity here on the island. And so do we really have a well-represented council with respect to all the different marine activities that can happen here? Whether it's tourism-related, jet skis, parasailing, whether it's riding the ducks, I mean, all those things, whether you're taking people out on a dolphin watch, all those different things can be governed now by this council. But the representation of the council is all pretty much fishing or whoever the governor appoints. So in light of my concerns, Madam Speaker, with respect to the limited scope of council membership and with respect to the unclear adjudication process and permitting process, I would like to, don't get me wrong, I think that this is a really good move forward, but I think we just need we need to do a little bit more work on it. I would like to make a motion to refer it back to committee for the author and the committee to be able to confer on some of the things I brought up so that we can tighten up the bill and have something ready to implement when we pass it. So I'd like to make a motion at this time, Madam Speaker, to refer Bill 160-33 back to committee for some additional work.
Objection.
There's a motion to refer it back to committee, and there is an objection. Is there any discussion on the referral of the bill back to committee? So there is an objection, so I'm going to then call for the vote. All in favor of referring the bill back to the committee, please raise your hand. Okay, felt. So, okay, I'm going to go on then to the next member who would like to speak on the bill. I have Senator Torres.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to commend the author of this bill for coming up with a plan going forward that we certainly need to take a little more seriously on this island. And many of us can appreciate the efforts that were made when for example, Tumon Bay became a preserve, recognizing that that asset was in peril and that we needed to take some aggressive measures to change the course that it was going. And now we know that it's a thriving and healthy marine preserve. What I would like to bring up to the author, though, and if I may pose a question, I'm a little concerned, though, with the extent of the jurisdiction of this council with regards to its powers and duties. Specifically, I want to ask the author if he contemplates that the jurisdiction extends to all of Guam's waters, including shorelines that are privately owned, businesses that, or agencies that have jurisdiction over certain shorelines and beaches. For example, is it contemplated that there may be the circumstance where rules and regulations go as far down as the recreational level that a private citizen might want to engage in on shores that they privately own or in public areas of the government, such as the boat basin, Rod and Reel? And secondly, if this has to do with jurisdiction. So one example is your shoreline, your private shoreline. The other jurisdiction, for example, would be those public places like, for example, the Port Authority, where they do regulate and permit fishing in certain areas that are restricted access.
Senator McCready?
If I understand the question correctly, I'd be the first one to stand up here and say I would like to keep the government out of our private lives as much as possible. So I don't know if that answers the question, but as far as the concerns, if I understand them correctly, if there's an amendment that wants to be proffered, I wouldn't have an objection to any type of amendment. You know, I don't know if I really understand the question, but private property and public property, I think when you fish, you take it out of the ocean. So I think that when you talk about the permits and the powers that the previous speaker is alluding to, I believe, you know, we coordinate in the conservation of Guam's oceanary, develop permits, oversee expenditures. That means we're looking at the fish they're taking, how many they're taking, what size they're taking, what kind of fish they're taking, what fish is not being taken out because maybe there's not a lot of them left over. if the fish is on the bottom of the ocean, on the middle, or on top of the ocean. Can you fish from the shore and be successful at it? Is there enough fish that sustains our island from shore? So I think when you talk about the overall reasoning for the commission, I think a lot of those questions need to be answered, and they should be answered whether it's a public or private fishing platform that they fish off of, but because the fish are coming from the ocean. So, that's why we have 3 members of the community on top of the board, and those 3 members alone were 3 members that was suggested during the public hearing. So I think the focus for this bill is the fish itself, not so much where you're fishing from, or it's the fish. What do we have to do to make sure there's fish in the ocean for not just this generation but the next? I hope that answers the question.
Senator Torres. And as it relates to private property, I'm not sure you have private property past the high water mark.
That is correct. But what I was referring to specifically, Mr. Speaker, is we have a culture where fishing is a part of our culture, where people go out and cast nets, and kids are bought a rod and reel at a very young age and taught how to cast. There's a very basic level of taking a fish in the community. And what I was wondering was whether this is so broad and overreaching. It's such an overarching intent that it's going to cut into those things that are so basic and elementary and really, in the grand scheme, are non-consequential. I understand putting in permits and, for certain types of activity at a certain threshold where they can cause harm. But the basic EE collection and all those things that, you would, catching manahawk at the bay, I just can't. And I suppose though that within Section 63903, the Council's powers and duties, those things can be vetted. But what I wouldn't be inclined to do is vote legislation that at the start contemplates that you're going to regulate and permit every single function of the taking of marine life from our oceans, because that could include, like I said, something as elementary as a little 6-year-old learning how to cast his thing to catch his first EE and mackerel at the boat basin. It just seems nonsense that we would contemplate to that level. So I hope that this doesn't mean that a way of life is going to be severely affected or adversely affected.
Thank you. Senator McCready, did you wish to respond to that?
I just want to make it for the record, and because if this does get codified, then for the record, that this is not in any intention to not inspire a future generation to use the traditional methods of fishing for whatever reason, whatever it is, net fishing talanzas or fishing with a pole, traditional way. And she did mention manahawk, and manahawk, I can tell you now from the report of the experts, is actually growing on Guam because of the preservation concerns. So I don't think that was a concern, but yeah. So just for the record, it doesn't have anything to do with children fishing, or fathers taking their kids out fishing, or mothers.
Thank you very much. Senator Torres, was that the extent of your comments? Okay. Senator Espaldon, I see that you're next on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a couple things. Right off the bat, on page 3, under subsection H, it basically, one of the duties, again, was to provide assistance, guidance and assistance to the Department of Agriculture, and it has a citation of Title 10, Chapter 63. And I went to that title, and that is not the title or the chapter in which it should be referred to, because Title 10, Chapter 63 deals with the Guam National Guard. So, and the reason why I think that's important, aside from just correcting, is because further in that paragraph on line 15, we have the council is authorized to assume duties, certain duties, powers, and responsibilities vested in the Department of Agriculture. And so I was trying to find out what they were. And again, without a proper citation, I'm not really sure where to go to find out what powers and duties that this council will be able to assume from the Department of Agriculture. So I'm asking for a little time to have the author, or even now, for the author to just tell me where the proper citation should be, where I should go to look to see what kind of responsibilities that they could assume.
Senator McCready.
Change it to 1, but I need to understand what it is now, because we need to understand what powers and responsibilities this council will have that they can assume from the Department of Agriculture. To change it is one thing, to understand what it is so that we can argue it.
We'll take a short break.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the good senator, the author of the bill, was able to identify that really it should have been Chapter 63 of Title 5. So if there's any one who wants to make reference to refer to the title, it should be Title 5, and that makes it at least something we can take a look at what kind of what kind of duties, powers, and responsibilities vested in the Department of Agriculture the council is authorized to assume. I would imagine that, okay, yes, and then further on it says that would have to be by, I guess, some kind of MOU in writing between the council and director of agriculture. I guess the other point that I'd like to raise at this point, at this time, Mr. Speaker, is on page 2, line number 19. And it's actually, this is section B, and one of their duties and powers is to develop, impose, and issue permit requirements, and establish a schedule of fees in connection with therewith relative to the conduct of commercial marine operations and the harvesting of fish, etc. I guess the question I have, and it's not really directed towards the author, but the question I have in my mind is, the author did state previously that the focus of this bill is primarily on fish and the fishing thing. However, now under this line 19, or this subsection B, they have the power, this council will have the power to impose and issue permit requirements and establish fees relative to the conduct of commercial marine operations. And that's a very broad sweep. And so it's almost not consistent with the statement that the author made, that really the focus of this is about fishing and protecting them. And I just want to really try to understand, are we talking about fees and permits for commercial marine operation, all boat operations, things that may happen down at commercial port? I'm not sure. So it would seem to me that if it's really supposed to be focusing on just fishery issues, then maybe it should be reworded to a degree, or stricken altogether, the whole portion about the conduct of commercial marine operations, because that encompasses a very broad sweep, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Senator McCready? Yes.
I'll transform it into a question, and the question is on line 18, but it really continues on to line 19. Basically, the council will have the power to impose fees and permits and all that good stuff relative to the conduct of commercial marine operations. And my concern is that's a very broad sweep when we're talking about fisheries itself.
Thank you. Yes, I do yield to the question. I'm having some off-the-line conversations with some other senators. They have identified that the language, and they are going to proffer an amendment to remove it. I don't know if the retiring speaker would like to make an amendment, which I would have no objections to, but there has been some concern raised as well, and I think the next speaker is going to make an amendment.
If I may.
I'll allow it.
Thank you.
Senator Respicio?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of Bill 160, and I certainly appreciate the discussion that we've been having, and the sponsor wanting to create this council so that they could be organized and they could have more authority with respect to what happens in the oceans and also with relative to fisheries conservation. I rise to bring to the body's attention that many years ago, we also adopted, through the efforts of former Senator Gutherds, a law that had to be overridden by a previous legislature that would create indigenous fishing rights here on Guam. And this law required that the rules and regs be developed, and they've met as much as they could. They've couldn't have some kind of understanding or some kind of agreement as to what they saw in their mind should be the perfect rules and regs to provide for indigenous fishing rights, and we've had many public hearings here, the public hearing room, sometimes till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. A couple instances we really ran that late, and so much so that in this current term, Speaker Wampat has graciously agreed to take over the whole indigenous fishing rights issue to make it so that it's a cultural issue. And I think that when we look at creating a council to provide for conservation fisheries and what happens in our oceans and our waters, I think that's really also consistent with the whole idea of indigenous fishing rights, is the preservation of the marine stock so that it'll be available for future generations, and that the laws will be able to protect that. I rise to offer an amendment to page 2, where I think that in every instance, Mr. Speaker, we can determine that more organizations can be identified, more individuals can be identified to help in the cause and the spirit of what previous legislatures has done, specifically in the great struggle to want to establish these indigenous fishing rights here on Guam. I want to offer an amendment to add a new A, and that would be to prepare and coordinate the implementation of the indigenous fishing rights pursuant to Public Law 29-127.
On that amendment, any senator wish to be heard?
Well, I mean, the feedback I'm getting already is it's not a simple amendment. It's a simple amendment, but it's significant. If we're gonna create this council to do things like coordinate and promote activities in connection with the conservation development of Guam's oceans, to develop, impose, and issue permit requirements, and we may be able to address that, to oversee the expenditure and management of funds. If we're going to create a council to do all of these things, I think it's also imperative that part of this council's duties and responsibilities is to recognize that there's an existing laws on the books that provide for indigenous fishing rights. And these individuals, Mr. Speaker and colleagues, have worked really hard to try to get the administrative support that they need. And if this council is going to be stood up to do the very things that are supposed to be done, it must be done consistent with Public Law 29-127. And so what I see in my mind is that you would have this council created if this bill became law, and then you have all these individuals meeting to want to do all these preservations and protections, and at the same time they're developing policies. One of their policies ought to be to provide for indigenous fishing rights. And when I spoke to the sponsor about my amendment, he said that he's been inviting those individuals to the table, and unfortunately they haven't come to the table, and I wouldn't blame them because they have been disenfranchised and discouraged over the years over one hurdle over the other. But I think if we just put as a power of the council and the duty to prepare and coordinate the implementation of indigenous fishing rights pursuant to Public Law 29-127, it doesn't remove the hurdles currently before this whole issue. It doesn't remove any legal impediments to providing for indigenous fishing rights, if there are any. It just basically says that this council must also recognize that they're going to be stood up to prepare and coordinate the implementation of the indigenous fishing rights.
On the Respicio amendment, I see Senator McCready's hand up. Was there another hand up on this side? Senator McCready.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I don't have a problem with the amendment. As I said earlier in my opening testimony, the only way this idea or this industry will survive is everyone works together, which would include the indigenous fishing people. Now, this amendment that he's making, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Senator, is the only way that the indigenous fishing rights, rules, and regulations has life again. This is the only way that they can move their idea forward. Without this piece of legislation, they're stuck, because I do believe that the Attorney General denied their rules and regulations earlier. So, having said that, how could you not want their rules and regulations to move forward? Because they also should have a voice. But I do believe this will not work if we don't work together. So while I don't see a problem with the amendment, Mr. Speaker, if the two entities cannot work together and promulgate rules and regulations that match the mandate, then we're going to be back to square one again. And then another legislature or another legislator is going to be in here trying to pass some kind of mandate again for fishing regulations. We're at the 1 yard line here. We can take these rules and regulations, which I think the indigenous fishing rights have the rules and regulations more on the federal side than on the local side. But we can take those rules and regulations, make them right the second time, learn from our mistakes, and then move forward. But we're all going to have to just work together. So I don't have an objection. I think it's a good amendment if they decide that they work together and make sure that they move forward.
Thank you very much, Senator McCready. Madam Speaker, and did Senator Bloss, was your hand up? No. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I support the amendment, and the reason why I support the amendment, and I'd like to share with our colleagues some of the things, basically, or meetings that I've been having with the different groups for indigenous fishing. And we met with the Attorney General's office several times, and with the group, and discussing basically, really trying to break it down in terms of what is the main objection here, what is it that they really want to do, and and no one should ever, accuse them of ever saying that, they're not concerned about, conservation. That they're not, also to say that it's just, for them. They were even considering the possibility of wanting to seasonally open it up and rotate, the places so that it will allow for the fish to again to repopulate, an area. We talked about the example that the UOG had set up, the Marine Life, where they went in and actually did not seedling, the larvae of the manioc to actually stock our waters, and that was very successful. We were looking at another, which is, what everybody loves here, is the parrotfish, and trying to work with Palau, who's actually have a program on that. So the university individuals were very interested. We're trying to find ways to be able to continue with the practice, with the tradition, but then at the same time to make sure that then they'll be able to have more fish for their children and for future generations, and not, of course, just at the expense of, our culture, our traditions, and our practice. So when you really look at the in page 2 with the powers and duties, everything here that's being done to promote activities in connection with conservation, with the development of Guam's oceans, fisheries, and marine resources. That's exactly what the indigenous groups also want to do, to develop, impose, and issue permits. We talked about permits as well. We even talked about, some fees, a schedule of fees. We even talked about individuals who would be out there monitoring. We talk about possibly the Cape individuals helping, the possibility of some of the individuals to be deputized so that they can go out and monitor the conservation areas to make sure that no one is out there illegally harvesting, the fish and marine life in our waters. So everything that you really see here, at least with A and B, for in terms of what it's trying to do, we're all part of it. One thing that I brought to their attention, something really that surprised me in one of my meetings in Palau, where the youth had gotten together with the leaders of their villages and the fishermen. And the fishermen told me, they said, Speaker, I want you to know this. The legislation, the laws that they have right now for conservation and when people can fish, how much they can fish, how much they can take out, these seasonal fishing, was spearheaded by the fishermen themselves. It wasn't generated by their legislature, their Congress. It was the fishermen, and thinking, of course, of their traditions, wanting to make sure that future generations will be able to continue to have fish, provide for their families, continue with their tradition by protecting what they have. And the suggestion was in the group, when I met with them, is their feeling about what if then we would set up, a fishing industry, meeting of the commercial fishermen, the rod and reelers, the divers, those who are fishing for sustaining their families, those who want to teach the practice, all of them. And then also at the same time, bring in the experts, bring in the technical people, the scientists who would tell them basically that, well, this is maybe the life of a fish, and this is what you should do. Because I think with all that knowledge, that then people would start to think that there are some things that are going to have to change. Some of our habits maybe. And this is at least what I'm hearing from the author in terms of what this whole, bill is about. And so, with that, of course, and in several meetings that I've had with the indigenous groups and the Attorney General's office, is that, I really believe that if there's any one place who would know this, that can actually maybe bring everybody together, because they all have the same concern, and that will be, yes, the conservation and development of Guam's oceans, fisheries, and marine life, but yet you could still have that element of traditional practices and traditions, but then at the same time practicing conservation. So with that, I hope my colleagues then would give this, some, favorable consideration. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we want to do everything we can to try and move the indigenous fishing rights effort forward. My concern is that this mechanism, first of all, I don't think was originally intended for that, and now I feel like we've kind of deviated away from where we're going with the whole intent of the bill. And I think that there's just a lot of questions that need to be answered with respect to what it is that we're trying to achieve with Bill 160. My initial interpretation of Bill 160 was that we're trying to create a conservation authority, a council that's going to create a permit schedule, review those permits, and somehow figure out how to adjudicate those things with respect to whether it was a commercial activity or fishing activity. I don't think that the council composition was adequate to get that done. I don't think that the adjudication and administrative provisions in the bill were adequate to get that done. But I stated that earlier. Now we're taking it to a whole new different area. We're focusing more on the fishing area, and I still have the very same concerns. I don't feel like the bill has the necessary provisions in here for us to be able to adjudicate fishing regulations, much less now adding on top of that the indigenous fishing aspect of it. Without any kind of clear adjudication process here, how does somebody go about applying for an indigenous fishing permit? Where do you go for that? Do you go to agriculture because there's an MOU, or should you go to Chamorro Affairs because it's indigenous? I wouldn't even know where to begin with that. And if your fishing permit is denied or revoked, who would you appeal to? And what would that permit even entitle you to do? Would that let you go fishing in preserves or not? Because I think that was an underlying issue of the indigenous fishing rights. And if it was to authorize you to permit into the preserves, what authority does this council have to be able to bypass whatever federal limitations there may be with that? So we still have the same adjudication problems, whether we make this be focused primarily on the conservation aspect or focused on becoming a fishing regulatory body to include the indigenous fishing rights. The other concern I have, Mr. Speaker, is if we were to add this amendment, the composition of the council does not in any way represent the perspectives of the indigenous fishing community. Again, we went through the membership of this council, and none of them in there are indigenous fishing representatives per se. I'm concerned about creating this council and giving them the authority to promulgate these things and to create a permitting process, etc., without any of those groups represented in that council. So I would like to really implore the author with respect to this amendment. It really opens up two potential really good avenues for us to pursue. Either we pursue the conservation aspect to include commercial fishing, commercial activity, fishing, or we pursue just the fishing aspect to include indigenous fishing. But either way, if we're going to pursue either channel, or if we're going to even try and do both, it's going to require a lot more attention to the detail of how the bill and its mandates would be carried out. And I would like for us to really do either one of those two things very, very well. But in order to do that, I think we really should go back to committee and talk this over and figure out, okay, are we going to focus more on the fishing side? Are we going to add the indigenous element to it? How are we going to compose the council in order to be able to address their concerns? What will be the adjudication and permitting process administratively? And then go forward from there. And then we have a good fishing regulatory bill. Or we can go right back to where we were and talk about the conservation side and have a good conservation bill. But I think that, that neither is well served with this bill, even with this amendment. And so I would like to implore the author to really reconsider whether or not we can just go back to committee, give another month or two of really good focus and work, and bring in all these different groups, and then just square away these concerns that we have on the record. And it really would help the effort to achieve what it's trying to achieve, which I think is laudable either way, whether it's conservation or fishing regulation. But I think we need to really focus a little bit more and cross the T's and dot the I's a little bit better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Senator Respicio, I believe you had an amendment after this, so I'll let you address the concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, I would quickly close to say that what this bill is trying to do with respect to the development of this council, it's imperative that we have this council recognize current law, which deals with the implementation of the indigenous fishing rights. And I said in my opening, just by adding these simple few words into this section, it's not going to translate into having indigenous fishing rights here on Guam. What it's going to do, it's going to make this council recognize that there's a current statute that provides for indigenous fishing rights, and as they develop all their policies and as they do things with respect to the kind of activities that are to occur with conservation and development of Guam's oceans, fisheries, and marine resources, that they some way, somehow have to recognize the indigenous fishing rights statute. And so it's important that we recognize this statute and this particular bill that's going to create this council that's going to deal with these kinds of activities. And with respect to the comments of providing for this coordination and preparation of indigenous fishing rights, we're not also going to reflect that the membership and the composition have at least one member, and I plan to do that in another amendment, Mr. Speaker, if this passes, to have, of the 3 community members, have one represent the grassroots community. And so I was going to address it in that way. So I hope my colleagues can support this amendment and also recognize that just because you provide for fishing, it doesn't mean that you're going to be overfishing, and that's where conservation comes in. And so you can have fishing activities to work in conjunction with conservation efforts. And as they're supposed to do that through this bill, they should also recognize all the challenges involved with indigenous fishing rights and how to resolve that.
Thank you very much. I would call the question, but Is everybody on the floor?
Mr. Speaker, since
Yeah.
it wasn't written down, could he just repeat the wording of that amendment, please?
Okay. So it's going to be a new A, to prepare and coordinate the implementation of indigenous fishing rights pursuant to Public Law 29-127. Yeah, of indigenous fishing rights pursuant to then the Public Laws 29-127. I mean, whatever.
Okay.
Was there an objection, Mr. Speaker?
No, but I was just waiting for the speaker to come out. She had asked me for.
Oh. Were you still going to call for a vote? If you called for a vote and there's no objections, I may not have 8
All
votes.
right. Please. Oh, do you recess? No, we'll recess. Legislature's back in session.
Mr. Speaker?
Senator Espaldon, you had an issue. Has that been resolved?
Yes.
Senator
Yeah,
Respicia.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Public Law 29-127, which created the framework for the indigenous fishing rights, it's predicated upon the fact, Mr. Speaker, that the director of the Department of Agriculture has to put together the rules and regs, which has to be adopted in accordance with the AAA process. And so since the director of agriculture is also going to be a member of this council, I think he shouldn't be allowed to be on both sides of the issue, where they should be all coordinating together. And so this language to prepare and coordinate the implementation of indigenous fishing rights pursuant to Public Law 29-127 would still have to go through the AAA process ultimately for those rules and regs. Okay.
So on the Respicio amendment, is there an objection? Hearing no objection.
Thank you.
Do you have another?
Yeah, on page 2, line 20, there's been some discussion with what constitutes commercial marine operations. Are they now going to have the authority to regulate all kinds of marine operations? I have an amendment in consultation with the sponsor to say commercial fishing vessels, because the sponsor said that the intent of this, Mr. Speaker, is just to regulate those fishing vessels that are and boats that are tied to the harvesting of fish. So I would make an amendment to delete marine operations and instead insert fishing vessels. So it'd be relative to the conduct of commercial fishing vessels.
Is everybody clear with that? Oh, Madam Speaker, you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, you're right, because I did raise my hand to speak on the issue, and that was one of the things I wanted to ask a question on, is exactly what this commercial marine operations is versus now, I know the amendment to change it to commercial what? Commercial vessels? Fishing vessels. So, can we get, whomever can he or maybe the mover, the primary sponsor then at least, first of all, is define exactly what the commercial marine operations is and why that now is being deleted to now include marine vessels, commercial marine vessels. Can I get the difference between the two?
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'll yield. Several senators have raised concerns regarding what constitutes commercial marine operations. Are they now saying that this council will be able to regulate current marine activity, which could mean the jet skiing and other water sports activities in the bay? So the sponsor is saying that the commercial marine operations here is tied to those fishing vessels that are involved in fishing, that are involved in the harvesting of fish. So it was his recommendation that we change marine operations to commercial fishing vessels. Or maybe we should just say fishing vessels, because private fishing vessels would also be problematic if there should just be fishing vessels, right? Yeah, so I think it would just be fishing vessels instead of, so you don't have to differentiate between commercial and private. It's just fishing vessels. Is that better, Speaker? Yeah.
We'll take a minute. Senator Spicio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So on page 2, line 20, I move to replace the words commercial marine operations to fishing vessels.
Any objection? Senator Espaldon.
I guess I just want to know, at present, who has purview over permitting and the regulations and fees for any commercial fishing vessel or any fishing vessel that may be out there? Does anybody know? I mean, if we're going to transfer that authority over to this new council, I just want to know who has it now.
Well, I was
Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I mean, if we're going to change that this council will now have purview over the imposition of permits and fees and whatnot over commercial fishing vessels, the question I have is, who has purview right now? Who are we taking that away from? I mean, don't boats have to get licensed someplace? I don't know. And so, to the ignorant, which I am one, in terms of commercial fishing vessels, who has purview? Are there any?
Sponsor?
I can give you the process that is, what happens when you buy a boat, and I think this addresses this question. When you buy a boat, whether it's from Guam or from off island, say you buy it from off island, you ship it here, you go through the normal process through customs and through the port. When you bring it to Guam, you get a one-day permit to drive the trailer without a license. You take it to GPD. GPD gives you your boat trailer license, and they register it. GPD then gives you the operator's number for the boat, which would be the Guam, basically a license plate for the boat. And then they give you the registration, which tells you exactly what type of boat you have, make, model, year, size, name, if you have a name. And so that's the process it goes. Now, that's a yearly process. And so every year you have to re-register your boat and basically go through it's almost as if you go through the same process as buying a car. You got to register it, and they don't offer, I don't think they offer insurance for boats on Guam. So basically it's the same process. I hope that answers.
Okay, but did you have a question, Senator Nicholas? Senator Espaldon, does that answer your question?
To a degree it does, because, I mean, he did explain the process, and he did say you have to go to GPD to get a license and a registration, and I would assume that means that's the permit to be able to operate the boat in the water. So when you start saying that this council now has the authority to issue permits, are we saying that this council now has the authority to issue the license and the registration to permit the boat in the water?
Mr. Speaker, can we, maybe to simplify this, can we just recognize that the amendment just changes the words commercial marine operations to fishing vessels, and we're dealing with the conduct of those vessels in the waters? I mean, I know the questions that
I think
Senator
we've
Spadanis
spent
raises.
enough time on this. I will set this aside, and it'll come back up on the agenda. Madam Speaker, you can resume your chair.
Session. Senator Ada, you're recognized for Bill number 273.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move to accept Bill number 273-33 COR as amended.
On the motion to accept, no, as substituted, you got to read that, you're right. As amended by the committee. Okay. And further substituted on the floor. So on the motion to accept, no objection, so ordered.
And so then now I move to place Bill number 273-33 COR as amended and further substituted on the floor to the third reading file to discuss it.
You may proceed, Senator.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, Bill number 273-33 has to do with a land exchange as a result of the government exercising its eminent domain when the Department of Corrections was being established. And that was back in 1984. And at that time, the owner, Mr. Teodoro, the way the law was written was that it authorized a land exchange with a certain Mr. Teodoro and Dolores Lanes. That was 31 years ago. Well, to this date, that land exchange has not been accomplished. And since then, the original landowners, Teodoro Lanes and his wife, Dolores, have passed away. But the law says that the land exchange will be with them. But prior to the passing of Mr. Lanes, they did execute a deed of gift to their daughter. And so what Bill 273 does is on page 2 of the bill, it makes an amendment on line 17, starting there at line 17, which now allows the land exchange to be with the surviving heir, which is Miss May C. Lanes, or if for some reason, again, this land exchange does not transpire, whoever the surviving heirs are. So that's the first thing that the amendment that the bill, that this bill does. The second amendment that the bill makes to the original land exchange law has to do with the requirement for land appraisals. And back then, 31 years ago, the government came in, exercised its eminent domain, and says, I'm going to take your land and we're going to exchange it for land elsewhere. But you, Mr. Landowner that we're taking the land from, will have to pay for a land appraisal. And then the government of Guam will then also do a land appraisal, and if there's a big difference between the two, then you take the average of the two land appraisals, and that will be the land value that will be established for the land that's being exchanged. Well, that just does not seem fair. And so what the bill does is in Section 3, starting in Section 3, it makes certain amendments there which requires that with regards to the appraisals of the land, that basically it stipulates here is that, to make that that exchange, we're going to need a land appraisal because this is going to be a value for value exchange. So all it's asking for is that, let's get land management, get an appraisal of the land. And then, of course, the original law requires that the land exchange be accomplished within 180 days. Now, we all know that the government is strapped for cash. And so I can almost envision probably another several years passing, and we're not going to get this land exchange accomplished because we don't have the cash for the government to be able to go out there and make a land appraisal. So what the bill does on page 3 is it adds a new section to the law, starting on line 15 on page 3. And it basically says, fine, if you don't have the cash, Department of Land Management, to go and get a land appraisal done, then, as an alternative, then you can use the current Department of Revenue and Tax real property tax assessment for the determination of the fair market value. And that is information that is readily available from the Department of Revenue and Tax. They go in there and they say, okay, lot number such and such, the appraised value on that is a certain amount, and we can use that. But now, sometimes the government does certain things which doesn't quite comport to, what really is fair. So if they come out and they say that the appraised value of your land according to this tax assessment that was done by the Department of Revenue and Tax, the appraised value of your land is $10,000. And the landowner says, wait a minute, my neighbors around here, they recently got an appraisal and their value of their land is $13,000 or maybe more. And so in paragraph D there on line 18, it does provide that option for the landowner that should there be a dispute, then the private landowner can, by all means, go hire your own land appraiser and see what he comes up with. And then whatever that land appraisal value is and that revenue and tax land assessment, tax assessment value is, then you take the average of that, and that will be the value for that particular land that is to be exchanged. And so basically, Madam Speaker, Bill 273-33 seeks to correct a wrong, an injustice that's been ongoing for the past 3 decades. And now the surviving heir of the original landowner is asking for these changes to be made so that that land exchange can be accomplished. And I ask my colleagues to support the bill. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Blanche, you're recognized.
Thank you and good afternoon, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I stand in full support of 273-33. In doing so, Madam Speaker, just to remind the body, and back I think it was in the 30th Guam Legislature, I introduced a similar piece of legislation for a different family with the very same circumstance. So, if this body has entertained this similar type situation before, what this bill is asking for is very similar to what this body had approved for in a previous legislation and that we allowed to enact into law. So, with that, Madam Speaker, I think that with regards to any concern, with regards to the process that this bill proposes for this land exchange, it has been done before by this body. It was done, like again, for a different family. In fact, it was a Cruz family, Salas Cruz family, in the Mingilo, in that same area in DOC. So, just for the, so that our members, can be in line with regards to the process, it has been done already. So I stand in support.
Thank you, Senator. On the motion, anybody else would like to speak? Senator, you want to close? Or?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, if I may be allowed to just make one minor amendment, and that is on page 3, line 16, that it should read that new subparagraph C is that the current Department of Revenue and Taxation real property tax assessment may be used as the fair market value.
Okay. So on the amendment, on page 3, line 16, the word for to delete and use the word as.
Yes.
No objection? So ordered. Thank you, Senator. So on the motion then to send Bill 273 to the third reading file without any objection, so ordered. Senator Rodriguez on Bill number 275. Yes. We'll take a brief recess.
We're back on the record. I believe, Madam Speaker, you've moved to 277, is that correct? 277, Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to place Bill 277 as substituted by the committee on third reading. Be asked to briefly speak on it.
Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the manner and method of operating the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority requires significant change in order to provide quality healthcare services to the people of Guam. Challenges in financial stability date back to the inception of the hospital in the late 1970s. The original Guam Memorial Hospital was constructed at Satpun Point in 1965, representing a major change in the history of the local governments attaining a direct role in the delivery of hospital services. Previously, the U.S. government provided free hospital and healthcare services to the people of Guam. This provision of free care initially created an expectation within portions of the community that continues somewhat to this day, as evidenced by the historical lack of payment by a significant portion of the self-pay patients, uninsured patients categories, and even insured patients' co-payments. In 1964, the Guam Memorial Hospital was established as a line agency of the government of Guam's executive branch. 13 years later, in 1977, the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority was established as a public corporation and has since been operating as a governmental nonprofit institution serving the people of Guam under the governance of a 9-member board of trustees. In the late 1970s, the government transitioned from the rapidly deteriorating facility at Satpun Point by purchasing and transferring to the nearby Medical Center of the Marianas at Oka Point, which was initially constructed by the Catholic Archdiocese of Agana. The hospital's historically tumultuous financial difficulties can be traced to its beginning with a deficit of $9 million by 1978, during its initial operation as a public corporation, with continual deficits to date. That deficit has grown to over $20 million in 2015, and the hospital has never been without significant deficits since those early times. From the initial commencement of services, the practice of the government was to provide subsequent funding to maintain and continue services for all patients, regardless of their ability to pay. Legislature in Guahan, in this bill, Mr. Speaker, finds that the history is again repeating itself, and the current situation will not change unless we assess a different path. Continuous parades of boards of appointed trustees and administrators have passed through the doors of GMHA. Notwithstanding the qualifications and expertise of the generations of appointees, the challenge continues to be dependable stability in the leadership and operational management of the hospital. The continuing administrative instability impedes in implementing and following through with well-planned, consistent efforts toward establishing a firm financial footing. It is the intent of Bill 277 to direct the Guam Economic Development Authority to develop a request for information and put forth that RFI to the market. The purpose of this RFI, Mr. Speaker, is to seek information on how an interested contractor hospital operator would transition government operation of the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority to a public-private partnership while continuing to provide quality care that is accessible to all the people of Guam. The compilation and analysis of any respondent will assist the community and this body, us as policymakers, to move in a direction that finally provides long-term sustainability of Guam's public hospital. Mr. Speaker, Bill 277 is a roadmap to the way forward. We owe it to our people to explore all the options that may provide long-term improvements for GMH. We owe it to ourselves, as everyone in this body, in this hall here, has the intention and has worked to find a way to help the hospital. We owe it to the hardworking employees, Mr. Speaker, who have to day in and day out live within whatever they're given. And a lot of times they're given with very limited resources, but are still able to provide quality patient care to our people. The employees of the hospital, Mr. Speaker, are really the foundation of GMH. And so to be very clear, this bill and this RFI that we direct Gita to move forward is not an RFP. We are nowhere close to moving into a public-private partnership or even changing the model we have today. This really is the beginning where it sets a path toward looking at and exploring what other type of model we can use to improve our hospital long-term. This initiative as well, Mr. Speaker, is part of a 10-point plan that a group of individuals, both from the government, private sector individuals, have come together in a task force that we put together last year to really address the problem of healthcare, the delivery of healthcare in our community, and not just concentrating on GMH, because we know that throughout the years we have been this body and a lot of others have worked to plug up the holes of hemorrhaging at our hospital. But what needs to be done now, Mr. Speaker, is a holistic approach. This is one way to address and look at any alternative ways to operate our hospital. But what is needed is the simultaneous efforts of what is provided for in the 10-point plan. And one very big component of that, Mr. Speaker, is ensuring that we expand health insurance coverage to our people. We have over 30,000 of our residents who are uninsured based on a 2013 report. We know that yourself, the Speaker, Juan Pat, are working, and we're working together to ensure that we can come up with such a plan that would ensure our people have some sort of universal health care. And I always say when I go and speak to our people that sometimes that word universal health care is scary for a lot of people, but it's a fact. It's a fact that this is something that we must look at. It's a fact that this is an option that we must tackle in the next few months, and I look forward to the support of our colleagues here in moving that forward. But also, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to our colleagues here in supporting this first step in really exploring an alternative and different model in the operations of our hospital. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. When the Speaker relinquished the chair, she wanted to be first. I see Senator Tom Matta. Anybody else wish to speak on the main on this bill? Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I thank, of course, the author, the primary sponsor of this piece of legislation. And I know he had called me and asked me if I, wanted to sign on. And unfortunately, I was out of the office and I had really no time to read it. And I've read it and, and supportive of it. But there, and as he had mentioned, there are, several discussions that's actually been taking place for the last 3 years throughout the region. And that conversation, continues to happen because the hospital, Guam Memorial Hospital, in particular, has actually been the institution who's receiving patients throughout the region. And naturally, then the question always has been is that how can our hospital survive if you have individuals who come and do not have the ability to pay? And the hospital just couldn't very well turn anyone in. So the discussion then started around at the time, I know, when the ACA or the National Healthcare organization started, in which, we call it the Obamacare, where everyone mandates that everyone should have health insurance. And in this case, we're similar to every other place where you have the government will provide insurance, health insurance for its own employees. You have the private sector, for the most part, if they can afford it, and depending on its size, would then provide, again, health care to its employees. But then you have the third group, and the third group will be the ones who are what we consider then the uninsured. There's been many, many studies that's been conducted about the hospital, and we all basically know what some of the problems are, and we've just been verifying, in essence, what we already know. But now here is this taking it finally one step, further, and by doing so, that there's so many options that are being listed here, which is great because we're not closing ourselves to then just one option, or one option in which sometimes can be very scary to not just the government, who is because we have a government hospital, whether it's scary to those who feel that maybe if it becomes privatized, then they really won't have any place to go to. And then there's this whole discussion at one time that you yourself, Mr. Vice Speaker, have actually, presented and spoken of, a very successful group of business that, is currently operating in California that could very well be replicated here in Guam with a public-private cooperation or collaboration, that could assist in the operation of the hospital itself. The idea here as well, when you look at like number 7, where it talks about some available federal and non-governmental, monies that are available, and would it require legislation maybe to change that? Would it require maybe going to the federal government to ask on the possibility of reprogramming some of those monies if we're going to talk about health insurance? Then there's, of course, the whole idea of a healthcare information and a research, infrastructure. So when I was reading this whole thing and trying to tie it into what it is that we really want to do, because we can't only just be talking about the business side and the economic side of it. We can't look at profit margins only. We really got to look at, the health care of our people. And how do we do that? And I've had several conversations, as a matter of fact, with this doctor who was actually called to and brought into our neighbor to the Philippines to actually reform this hospital from a failing hospital to now a profit-making hospital. I spoke to him very early this morning, as well as early as 1:30 this morning, and he was called to Washington, D.C. to look at a public hospital in Washington, D.C. to also do a reform. And there's, we had a very interesting conversation, and that's where this is going to lead me to an amendment of a discussion that's been taking place throughout Micronesia. But some of the things that, he basically said that we need to also need to consider in the RFI as we talk about some of the different types of services. And we can't, so in essence what it is that you can't just look at Guam Memorial Hospital in isolation of any other public health or hospitals throughout the region, when we know that the individuals throughout the region are actually coming and going to GMH. So therefore, the consideration of a uniform type of a health care that will be uniform throughout the system, that has to be taken into consideration. Then he talks about an integrated system as well, one healthcare system operated by, like, where there's a public-private organization. The other thing that's really so interesting is the mandating that everyone then who are going to be insured, because then what you want to do when you think of it's a government hospital and you want it to continue as a government hospital, then you have to make a decision whether you want to fully fund that hospital, and what are some other mechanisms maybe to do that. So there's this whole conversation with MIP, and then there's Medicaid, then we have CHIPS, then we have others that we appropriate separately for DOC, like, what do we call them, clients, or a DOC. And then just last month, we also then appropriated monies for our foster children. So those that are in the care of, or the ward of the state, so to speak, then, should be included. So when you think about all those different groups and monies that are going in there, is the compilation of that, putting them together to possibly do an assessment whether then there could be, including them in an insurance plan by insuring all these individuals. And then the other, of course, is that you're needing to change the mindset of that we don't want it at the far end. When already it becomes real critical and becomes more expensive for the government, you're going to have to start at a very young age, and that's the CHIPs are children, 0 to 8, and mandate, of course, that twice maybe annually that there is this wellness, visit to the doctors to make sure they stay healthy. So with all that, then how do we take all that and put it together in terms of what it is we want to do and to see it happen? And the author is correct, because we've been having this conversation about a healthcare summit, and you yourself has been very involved in this, and you care about what has happened, that you've actually even gone to meetings at the hospital when they had a board. So there then is number 9 is what I wanted to provide as an amendment to include this, where we wanted to get information then related to then an annual, well, not maybe an annual now, but because we're really actually trying to plan one, but we want to use that hopefully as might be the impetus maybe in which the gathering of some information and the gathering of industry leaders, policymakers, regulators, providers, payers, patient representatives to discuss what it takes to make this innovative, affordable, and also medicine safe and accessible. And the reason for that, where I said to include the medicine, is because there is this, again, discussion throughout Micronesia with PIHOA, and these are the public health officers, and a recent meeting that they had, well, not just recent, but it was about a year ago in Palau, where Region 9 people were there and trying to get all of the region to kind of uniformly put their formularies together to make sure then that, for one, is that the medicine will be safe. Secondly, that they'll become affordable, because when you put them together, you buy them in bulk, if they're all basically following the same formulary. So, and I would do this so that it's not the whole thing, break it up, one at a time. So the first one then will be number 9 to add on to the bill. One at a time. Yeah, because I don't want anybody to be overwhelmed with this. I can do it all together. I mean, what's the pleasure, Mr. Speaker? You want me just to go through all 12 and explain it and then decide?
No,
no?
Let's do it one by one.
Okay.
The Speaker's First Amendment, did all of you get a copy? On her First Amendment to add a new 9. Any senator wish to be heard on that amendment? Just 9. Any senator wish to be heard on 9? Any objection to the amendment proffered as a new section 9? No, it's a new 9. So to add this paragraph, so whatever it's going to be 10? Okay. Anyone? Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just this question really is in reference to the RFI in general. are we going to be expecting respondents to respond to every single line item in the bill as they respond to the RFI, or can they only answer number 10, or can they pick and choose what to respond to in the RFI? Because I mean, as we broaden the scope of this RFI, which I'll discuss in the main motion, but as we broaden the scope of it, I mean, this is going to have a lot of cost. A feasibility study for a universal regional health insurance plan. I mean, that's not a small undertaking, you know? And so are we allowing for RFI respondents to pick and choose? They're only going to respond to item 1, they're only going to respond to item 9. How is the RFI going to work out that way?
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the RFI process really, even if the Speaker is listing these items here, this is not actually going out and doing a feasibility study. The RFI is going out there and soliciting and determining public interest for these desired scope of, for these items that we're indicating here. Whether they respond to it or not, these are at a minimum what we're directing GITA to put out, to publish as the information that we are seeking.
I believe the question being proffered is, even with just the current 9, when the RFI goes out, can the person submitting a response just answer 4? Or do they have to answer all 9?
No, it's really up to what, you know, if they can answer just 1 or 2. I mean, we don't even know. We might not even get anyone to come in and respond to the RFI completely, but these are at the minimum what we're putting out there.
Thank you very much. Senator Snickles, does that clarify the issue for you?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, a colleague of ours just pointed out, if you look at on page 4, line 14, after the word infrastructure, there's a semicolon and the word "and," which indicates for the RFI that it's all-inclusive. So it's inconsistent, at least the way the bill is written, with respect to the amendment. It's inconsistent with what the retiring speaker just said about whether or not they can pick and choose, or they have to be all-inclusive when they respond.
Mr. Speaker, if you read it correctly, look at page 3. What we're listing here is the information, starting line 22. The information to be solicited shall include at a minimum, but shall not be limited to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 9. So, you know, we're not saying they must respond to all of these. We're saying, as we're listing it, include at a minimum when you publish this RFI, number 1, number 2, number 3, all the way up to...
I understand the publication, but I think the question being proffered is in the response.
We're not forcing anyone to respond to it, because, you know, just like I said earlier, we may not get anyone. I mean, that's a possibility that somebody, you know, or nobody would respond to the RFI completely. But all we're saying as a minimum, I mean, because GITA may, you know, their board may come back and say, well, you know, we should include these other items in this RFI, then, you know, they would be free to do that. So this is not requiring the respondent to respond to each and every item.
Oh. Go ahead. Are you satisfied?
Well, I mean, it just concerns me, Mr. Speaker, because, for example, if we were to do an RFP, right, if somebody did not submit a full RFP, then their RFP would just get thrown out. We wouldn't even be able to entertain it, you know. And so if we're doing an RFI, and we itemize all these things and we say that the RFI shall include but not be limited to, that means that we're asking them to respond to all these things. And if they come in and they only respond to 1, why are we going to entertain only 1 response?
My understanding is that the RFI that's going out is asking people if they have any information that they would like to provide on any one of these items and explain, I would like to see this thing expanded or this expanded. address this issue. But it's not all 13 or...
Right. And so, and that, well, I don't want to deviate too, well, it does relate to the amendment, Mr. Speaker, and that is that if we're doing this and they can respond, we're basically opening the door and saying, anybody out there want to submit an unsolicited bid for any one of these items, go right ahead. That's pretty much what we're doing when we're opening it up for an RFI. We're saying, anybody want to...
Mr. Speaker, I think he has to understand, this is not an RFP. We're not soliciting for a bid. I think that's the first thing he has to understand.
Senator Tom Adda, I believe, is our resident procurement guru.
No, I guess first of all, Mr. Speaker, you know, when the author of the bill asked me to be a co-sponsor, I readily signed on because I want to move in the direction that he's moving with respect to Guam Memorial Hospital. But I must admit that, you know, putting into legislation a request for information really is something that I don't think requires legislation. GIDA can go out there and issue this notice that says, you know, what information do you have? Or GIDA can go out there and hire a consultant to answer all these questions. I think that what we need to head in the direction, which I certainly fully support, getting into a public-private partnership for the Guam Memorial Hospital, is for this legislature to establish the parameters for which we will be comfortable with this public-private partnership. For example, in page 3, it's talking about contemplating the transfer of management and operation in its entirety. Well, is that actually what the legislature would be comfortable with? Or is it's willing to maybe enter into a public-private partnership in whole or in part? We'll take care of hiring the employees. You take care of, you know, the other technical stuff that has to do. Maybe what we need in the legislation that will head us in that direction is to establish the comfort level of this legislature that we are willing to enter into a 30-year public-private partnership contract. And then when we start establishing those kind of parameters, then a potential investor out there may say, for 30 years, we can put in a lot of investment that gives us enough time to recoup. Certainly 30 years, given the kind of equipment that we need to put in, that sounds reasonable. But to, you know, basically right now, unfortunately, I think asking for all this information and then we say very specifically that we will not pay for any of the information that's going to be provided is like, you know, I mean, so if you want to volunteer your time to provide information, great, but we're not going to pay for it. Now, so that's where I hope that we may be able to adjust, you know, make some adjustments in this bill, is that we establish what is our comfort level and to establish those parameters. And then based on that, what really I believe the GIDA should send out is a request for interest. And then after we have established what the parameters are, and with that, then GIDA formally sends out and says, is anybody interested in getting involved in a public-private partnership given these kinds of parameters? Then at that point, what we're doing then is we're giving a leg for these requests for interest, and subsequently when we find out that, oh my gosh, you know, they're coming in by the train load, all these interests in getting involved, then the next step will be we develop that request for a proposal. Now, so I would hope that you know, we take a look at really maybe what 277-33 should establish when we leave here, and that is that we establish what the parameters would be of this public-private partnership that we are contemplating, and that will be the basis for which prospective investors can come in and say, I want to take a part of that, I want to be a part of that game, and because it provides me sufficient time to recover my investments. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for Senator Atta's comments. First, I want to just say that he is absolutely correct. We don't need legislation to actually do this. DITA or anybody could do this. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, for decades, we haven't done it. And so we're doing it this way in an attempt to set policy, set public policy that this body is now venturing into a path that would explore whatever opportunities or whatever options we could take a look at in the operations of the hospital. And in terms of the idea of setting the parameters and perhaps making it specific on exactly what it is we want in a public-private partnership, I don't think is the best course. The best course to take, because we may say, okay, these are the parameters. We just want this, and now go out there and seek interest. I don't think that's what we should be doing. I think what we should be doing is putting something like this out, that we're seeking information based on these items, whether it be a transfer of the management and operation of GMH in its entirety, that's number one, states, or number two, the transfer of limited management and operation of specific GMH services. Those are the type of information we should be seeking and obtaining. And based on those response, if any, if we do receive, that's when we take the next step and set the parameters of, okay, based on the information we receive, what's out there, what people have taken a look at, this is what we believe should be the best way to go out now and seek an RFP for a eventual public-private partnership. So really, that is the whole idea, and I'm hoping that we can still stick to that type of concept moving in, instead of keeping it closed and here making that determination here today, right now, saying we just want this. Go out there and get interest for this specific option. So that's what I really want to try to avoid, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, that explanation is exactly what we need to avoid. Because from what I'm hearing and what I'm interpreting is that we're going to say, okay, who wants to take over the management and operation of GMH in its entirety? And someone can come up and say, oh, I'll do it, and this is how I'll do it, and this is how much it'll cost, and this is this is how I would go about doing it. And then we will go out and tailor an RFP based on what somebody else responded to us, or basically setting up the RFP process to tailor a bid, to tailor a request for proposals around what we already know somebody is going to bid. I mean, it's like legally authorizing somebody to come in and do an unsolicited bid. There was this one time, Mr. Speaker, that somebody came into my office. This was a couple years ago, and they said, "Oh, Senator, I have a way to solve this certain problem." And they sat down and they were explaining it to me, and I said, "I'm sorry, you need to stop. You actually need to leave. I cannot engage in this conversation with you because it sounds like you're trying to sell me on a proposal that you want me to then tailor legislation around." We're not supposed to do it that way, Mr. Speaker. It's supposed to be, we go out, we determine what our needs are, and we go out and we request for proposals based on those needs. We don't go out there and say, what do you have to offer, and then say, okay, yeah, that sounds good, let's go build a proposal or a request for proposal around what you're saying you're going to provide. And that's
Mr.
what
Speaker,
I'm concerned about in this whole process.
Point of information,
I understand.
Mr. Speaker.
One of the problems, both of you, is that your opening gave good history, but it did not walk us through the bill. And now we're consequently having people, including your own co-sponsors, wondering whether or not this is the right way. It's now 2 minutes to 5.
Sure.
We'll recess until the morning. Talk amongst yourselves and
Okay.
try to figure out what you're going to do
Sure.
with it.
Mr. Speaker, if I could,